liebe Motorsportfreunde, heute eine weitere Folge der 1000. Grand Prix, die 100 besten Geschichten dazu. Heute haben wir als Gast Ross Brawn, wir treffen ihn bei sich zu Hause hier in England, in Stoke Row. Und Ross Brawn ist seit über 40 Jahren in der Formel 1 in allen möglichen Positionen. Er war Mechaniker, er war Aerodynamiker, Ingenieur, technischer Direktor, Teamchef und ganz zum Schluss jetzt ist er einer der Chefs der Formel 1. Ross, I just was telling, you are since 40 years, a bit more even than that in Formula One. Seen this business in many different positions. You still can remember how it all started?
Yes. I my first opportunity in Formula One was I was living with my parents in Reading, and Frank Williams had his factory in Reading, and he advertised in the local paper. Mm-hmm. And I'd finished my tool making apprenticeship, or instrument making. I was basically a machinist, a high precision machinist, and I'd finished my apprenticeship, and I was working my way through college, and I saw the advert in the local paper. So I went along to be interviewed by Patrick Head, as it happens, and didn't hear anything for quite a long time. And then I got a call offering me the job. And it's a funny story because when I got there, they said, I said, why did it take so long? Mm-hmm. They said, well, the guy we wanted to do the job came and didn't like it, and he's gone now. So you were the second choice. Yeah. And I honestly thought I would just do it for a year, a couple of years before I went back to college, because I dropped out of college to do it. I'd done a year at college and I needed to go back. And I never went back. And because I love the environment, I love the challenge and love the engineering so much. So that's how it first started.
Then, as you explained, you went to Wolf, March, coming back to Williams, but the second spell was already as an engineer then?
A mixture. When I went back to Frank the second time, the team was very small. I mean, I was the 11th employee. Yeah. And what was great about it is you did everything. So I would design some parts and I'd make them. And I'd fit them to the car and then I'd drive the truck. Yeah. Because it was a small team trying to make its way. And Frank and Patrick were operating with very little money. Yeah. So it was hand to mouth. And the business nearly closed down many times. So, but it was a great spirit, and we all worked together. And within a few years, we were 200 people, and we were winning world championships. Yeah. So it was a fabulous journey. Yeah.
Your beginning as an engineer was as an aerodynamicist for the team, or?
Well, aerodynamics in that stage, I had a passion for aerodynamics because I used to make model aircraft, and I just had a enthusiasm for aerodynamics. And it was the start of the ground effect area, where it became clear you had to start doing some wind tunnel work to understand what was going on. So my range of skills enabled me to design and build the models and then take them to the wind tunnel and run them. And in the very early stages, it was just me and a model maker. Frank Durney came a little bit later, and Frank added a lot more academic knowledge of the aerodynamic side than I had. But I was very lucky in that early period we did the work at Imperial College in London. And Dr. Peter Bierman and Dr. John Harvey were kind of unofficial consultants for us. And they used to come down almost every day and see what work I was doing, and they'd give me advice and they'd explain things. They told me what books to read. I've still got my journals from that period. And told me what books to read and showed me the principles of what was going on. And I was self-taught. I mean, I had an engineering academic background, not at a particularly high level, but it was a good solid engineering background. And I could understand the principles. And at that stage, it was what I would call very empirical. I mean, you were making models, putting them in the tunnel, trying to understand what was going on and changing them and seeing what the result was. So nothing like as sophisticated as it is now with CFD and simulation and all those sort of tools. So it just suited, my skills were adequate for that period. And we made great progress. And I remember the first time we put a ground effect car in the tunnel, and we thought the tunnel was broken. The forces were so high that we checked the instrumentation because it didn't seem right. And Lotus had a ground effect car, Williams didn't, and then we suddenly understood why Lotus were winning all the races. And the rate of progress in that era, the late 70s, early 80s, with ground effect cars and understanding of the aerodynamics was astonishing. I mean, we would, if we didn't come back from a week in the wind tunnel with 10 or 15% more performance, we felt we failed. Sometimes more. So, and I remember the first race that Williams won, which was Silverstone 79. That we designed a new underfloor in the tunnel a few weeks before, and take that design off the tunnel, built the full-size version, stuck it on the car, and we found like 1.5 seconds. I mean, it was just an amazing period, and very exciting. That's where I got that's where I did my groundwork, and so I ended up running the R&D department, because then we built our own wind tunnel. We took a wind tunnel that had been used, but without the facilities that you needed to do a racing car. Didn't have a moving floor, didn't have various things. And I designed all of that, and we got that made and built this tunnel. And we had our own wind tunnel. And we were first team really, I think, to do that. You know, Frank and Patrick were very forward thinking. And we had our own wind tunnels. I mean, I was in the wind tunnel every day. I was running that department, and it became a bigger department. It became an R&D department. So, for instance, the six-wheeler, which we did at Williams, was built in my department. And you know, so I ended up running R&D. Frank was head, but he was also off racing, and I was the factory-based engineer that ran the R&D department at Williams.
So, I mean, it all went well at Williams. They're winning races, winning championships, but still you left the team and went then to Haas, Lola. Why was that?
Ambition, really. I'd been there. I'd had a couple of years of sort of knocking out against Frank, and Frank's a very good friend of mine, and we get on very well. But professionally, he was my limit. I couldn't go any further. He was doing probably what I wanted to do, and also I had some ambitions to get more into the actual car design rather than just the development of the car. And this opportunity came along with Lola Haas, with and Neil Oatley, who was our chief designer at Williams, was also wanted to go. So Neil and I kind of held hands and jumped. And whilst it wasn't a massively successful project, it was a very important one for me, because it I'd only really worked for Williams my whole motor racing career, which with the first year, the 7 years I did, so I'd had 8 years at Williams, and it was time to understand what I could do myself in a different environment and different people. So that was the reason. I loved working at Williams. I left on very good terms, still very friendly with Frank and Patrick, and so I think just ambition and the wish to try something different was why I jumped.
And then after the Haas period, you went to Walkinshaw in different...
I did Arrows first. So
Arrows, then Jaguar, then...
So during the Haas period, I grew more confident in designing cars. And Neil was the chief designer, but I did the aerodynamics, and I did all the bodywork, and I did all the wings, and I designed them and had them made. So I was growing in experience and confidence. But the Haas thing wasn't going that well. The main sponsor, Beatrice, had been bought out. They wanted to withdraw. And I had an offer from Jackie Oliver Arrows to go and be the chief designer. He tried to get Neil. Neil wasn't interested, but Neil recommended me. And so Jackie Oliver, who knew me, didn't know me from Adam, called me up, went along, and this was the next step for me, the step to design a car myself. So I jumped into Arrows and did 3 years, and we didn't do too badly. We certainly lifted the team. A couple of races we could have won. I know you can say that a lot in motor racing, but there was, I think, Montreal one year we should have won. Another couple of races we could have gone differently for us, but we were getting respectable. You know, Arrows were midfield now. I think we finished 4th one year in the championship, so it was getting respectable. But the problem with Arrows was that we'd always have the funding at the beginning of the year, and then after about a third of the year, it was batten down the hatches, nothing could be done, we've got no money. And after 3 years of that, it got a bit frustrating. And I had this proposal from Tom Walkinshaw. My drivers at Arrows were Eddie Cheever and Derek Warwick, and they were Tom's drivers at Jaguar. So they were telling Tom about me, and they were telling me about Tom, because they both figured that we'd make a good partnership. And sat down with Tom. Tom said, look, I'm committed to sports car racing with Jaguar, but my ambition is to go into Formula 1. And you know, knowing what I learned about Tom, he certainly had the ambition, he had the aggression, he had the means to get into Formula 1. So I left Arrows, went to Tom, and we did the XJR 14 sports car, which was really a Formula 1 car with bodywork. And we won the championships with that. And then I moved with Tom to Benetton. And that was really where I came together with Michael. So that was the first big move for me. Being in charge of Benetton was pretty serious.
And then at Benetton, you moved another step up. You became technical director, and Rory was your chief designer. What is different? What a technical director does? Obviously, you didn't design the car then anymore. Or?
No, probably the Jaguar was the last car I could say I designed. It depends on the team. I mean, Formula 1 teams were growing to be such a size then that technical director oversaw the car design and development and saw the racing at the track, and had involvements in other things in the factory, but that was predominantly what it was. And it was technical director's role to marry the two together, to make sure the design group were really understood what was needed and what they were focused on, and then making sure that the racing group were making the maximum of the car they had and the tools they had and so on. And there used to be a time when the chief designer went to the races, but clearly that's not very efficient because the amount of time races take. So Rory and I formed a pretty easy partnership early on, where he wasn't desperate about going to races, and it wasn't his thing, quite frankly, to do the bureaucracy that races need. So he focused on the car design, the car development, and I kind of ran the whole thing. But I like to stay close to the car design because I've been involved. And Rory had a sort of a sounding board in me to talk through things and decide where we were going. But predominantly he designed the cars with my input where I could give it. So, and that was the next stage for me, and also really the next stage for Formula 1, because by then that was the type of structure that Formula 1 teams were evolving to cope with the number of races and the size of the teams and the challenge. You
mentioned already you also had to take care about the races, and this place at the pit wall, you created another image of yourself being the super strategist. Was that something to learn from a book, or something to learn really by doing?
It started with sports cars, to be frank. I mean, sports cars were very strategic races. So I had the 2 years with sports cars. I was fortunate to be there when we won Le Mans. So we won Le Mans the first year I was there. We won the sports car championship and the drivers' championship the second year I was there. But they were very strategic races. They were small fuel tanks, fuel stops during the race, quite a slow rate of refueling the cars. And so there was quite a lot of strategy involved. And Alistair McQueen, who was the strategist and chief engineer at Jaguar, taught me a lot about strategy, and because it really didn't exist in Formula One. I mean, he did a few calculations, but it really didn't exist. So when I went back to Formula One and refueling and the tyres evolved, where strategy became important, then I felt comfortable with what with my knowledge, and by then we'd built some tools to be a bit more sophisticated about trying to understand how a race might evolve. And with Michael in the team, who was intelligent and understood what was going on, and also had the skills, the talent to apply strategy. So if you needed him to overtake somebody, or you needed him to put 10 fast laps in, he was the man. So he gave you that opportunity to do things. And it's true, for a period I think we're fairly dominant, and it's a curious thing, because you become the reference, or you become the how can I put it, there's this image that you're the king of strategy. You're not really, but it intimidates people. So they're always looking what you're doing. And we found that we could do things to trigger other people to do things. And it was a lot of fun. You cocked up sometimes, or you got done by somebody else sometimes, but there was always the people kind of looking at what you were doing, and sometimes you could provoke them to do things which probably, if they'd been confident, a bit more confident, and stuck to their plan, they would have beaten you, but then they react. And so it was a lot of fun, that period, and I enjoyed it a great deal. And there was a synergy between Michael and myself and the team, where he trusted us implicitly. He knew sometimes it wouldn't work, but he never really challenged any decisions we made. And he always spent the time to understand it himself, so he knew how a race was going to evolve, and how it was going to play out, and when was the periods to push, when the periods were not push. And it was a pretty volatile period, because there was a lot changing. And one of the things I remember is we had, with the Benetton, particularly in '94, we had a great car, and we didn't have the qualifying pace, but we had very good race pace. And we would stop the car before we needed to. So in other words, we'd stop the car when we maybe still had 10, 20 litres of fuel left in it. Now that's not the quickest way, but if you can stay with the car in front and just hang on to him, and then you come in, your pit stop was much shorter, because you already had fuel in the car. So suddenly you'd do, I can't remember, a 5-second pit stop, and that should be so much fuel, but you already had fuel in your pocket because you had car. So then you could go much further. And so the opposition would be expecting you to come in on lap 35, but you'd go to lap 40 and completely screw them. And of course that caused a lot of friction, because people started to think we had a dodgy fuel tank, or we were doing something strange. It was dead simple. But because people, their mindset was such that those sort of things happened, and I had a lot of fun in that period. Some of it was pretty stressful, but I had a lot of fun with, our fuel cell kept getting pulled apart by the FIA to understand that our fuel rigs and all sorts of stuff was checked. But the answer was simple, and funnily enough, the FIA knew, because we told them what we were doing, and they checked beforehand, and they knew, but they had to seem to respond. So they played the game in a way, and they didn't want to let out of the bag what we were doing, so they played the game as well, in terms of checking our system. So.
You mentioned already the golden Ferrari era. What was the key of all that success, consistent success over 4 or 5 years?
I think, funnily enough, the difficulty we had the first few years, we got to the last race and lost the championship in 3 years running, and that could have broken a lot of teams. I think there could have been personnel changes, or in fact, if anything, it consolidated the team. I think don't don't get me wrong, we would have taken those championships and we could have won them, but I think the resilience the team showed and the unity the team showed was really valuable in what then came.
Yeah.
And there was a group of people who had great complementary skills. So there was Rory designing the car, Stefano running the team at Nigel Stepney, chief mechanic, Jean, who was handling the political situations mostly, and then Luca de Montezemolo, who was a great supporter. I mean, Luca's volatile, he's very passionate, but actually he was a great supporter in that. And it just the personalities gelled, and of course Michael. Yeah. The personalities gelled. We'd all learned and were mature enough to know that issues stayed within the team. So, we wouldn't necessarily get on with each other perfectly every day of the week. Yeah. There'd be disagreements, but we kept them in the team and we resolved them. And Ferrari's got fantastic resource. It was the best budget of any team, best resources, built its own engine, built its own car. And once all that was put together, it was a steamroller. And each year as we because the process was working so well, you'd get going, car would go, and then Rory would start on the next car. Yeah. So everyone else is trying to catch up, and Rory's already ahead of them because he's doing the next car. And this motion gets going. Yeah. And I truly believe if we hadn't been screwed by the tyre situation in 5 and 6, that we would have won 2 more world championships. In my view, the cars we had then, but we got turned over by this tyre decision, which now I'm sat on this side of the fence, I have some sympathy for, because we know any team dominating is not great for the sport. There's always more interest from the fans if there's some variation, and even the Ferrari fans, funnily enough, had mixed feelings about the domination in the end. I remember one Ferrari fan writing to me and saying, "You've ruined my Sundays because you now just win all the time. So I don't get excited when you win, but I get depressed when you lose." Yeah. Whereas before, a win was I could go out and have a party. Yeah. And now I don't bother with my parties anymore. So, but there was that chemistry amongst the people that, and it's still strong, funny enough. I was talking to Stefano this morning. Very friendly with Jean. I spoke to him the other day. I saw Rory about 2 weeks ago. I called Luca de Montezemolo on his birthday. Yeah. It was a genuine professional and personal relationship between a group of people that worked very well.
Coming back to your role as an engineer, what is the Formula One car in history you would have liked to design? What is your all-time great F1 car?
I love the simplicity of the cars in the 60s and 70s because the aerodynamics hadn't been understood at that stage. So they were looking at it from a mechanical perspective. So the efficiency of using the tires, the suspension, the brakes. So you look at some of the Lotuses. Yeah. The Lotus 49 started to move a little bit in that direction, but Lotus 49 is a car that I always remember. Of course, the Jim Clark cars, so they were 25, 26. Yeah. So I think Lotus were, for me, because Colin Chapman was such an iconic engineer. Yeah. Again, an engineer who had moved into some management, and so he was pretty ambitious with a lot of his designs, and occasionally, as we saw, some of them didn't work well at all. But he was always right on the edge, and very good driver himself, by the way. Yeah, Jackie Stewart tells me he could have been a very competitive driver, but he focused on the engineering and the cars. So I think the Lotuses from that period. So I could pick one or two, but Lotus 49 was a pretty special car. Okay.
But engineers, as you just described, who have a general overview, knowing about everything, about aerodynamics, mechanical side, how to use the tires. They are a thing of the past, more or less now. Huh?
Less so.
Yeah.
They still exist. I mean, James Allison at Mercedes.
Adrian
very much so. So, whether the sport becomes even more refined or more specialized, we've got Ferrari where an engine guy is running the technical side. And it's working. The team is very strong. So I think it doesn't have to be a very prescriptive set of skills, but the ability to run an engineering team is crucial, and the ability to use all that talent in the right way is the key thing. And some people, I think, thrive on that, and some people find it a struggle, and I think that's the core. I mean, even I'm not doing it now, but even when I was involved in a team, I couldn't dig very deep into what people were doing. I mean, CFD, I'd understand the presentation, I'd understand the principles, but I couldn't go very deep into it. I didn't know. But I knew when things didn't smell right. And I'd ask the right questions, and I'd ask for deeper explanations. And when you're working with a team, you know the people that over-promise and under-deliver, and you know the people that under-promise and over-deliver, and you know their characters, and you know the way they work, and you're there giving them the confidence, giving them the support, putting out the fires. Whenever a team I was involved with had a serious issue, either, let's say, with a crash test or some reliability problem or some legality problem, I tried to bear the brunt of it as much as I could. So I'd get involved, and if we had a dispute with the FIA, I'd always want to be seen as the person at the front taking the weight of that issue, even though it may not have been anything to do with me directly, but it's my team and I want to look after it. And I think if you're going to head up a Formula One team, that you have to take on that responsibility that someone who works for you might make a stupid mistake, but it's down to you to resolve it, to be responsible for it, and to fix it. So, but I think there are people still coming through, so I think there'll still be leaders in engineering who will head up these teams.
Okay, thanks, Ross. This is the end of part one. We move on then to see another project of you, which is the Brawn GP, where you had been team principal. So thanks for a while, and we'll see in a few hours in a different place what's going on. Ja, liebe Zuschauer, Sie haben es bestimmt gemerkt, wir sind nicht mehr bei Ross Brawn zu Hause, wir sind jetzt an einem anderen Ort, hier in Silverstone, und hinter mir steht ein ganz, ganz besonderes Formel-1-Auto, der Brawn GP, der seinen ersten Grand Prix gewonnen hat, der in seiner einzigen Saison den Weltmeistertitel gewonnen hat. Und über das wollen wir jetzt ein bisschen mit Ross Brawn reden. Ross, yesterday I saw the Wolf together with Jody Scheckter, and this was a car which won its first Grand Prix. There's another one which is just behind us. So you are the second person who won the first Grand Prix with a new car. But you told me you had been kind of involved even in the first project with the Wolf in 1977.
I was. I went to work for Frank Williams at the end of '76, and over that winter Frank lost control of the company, and Walter Wolf bought it. And that first car we did was the WR1, which went on to win its first race.
And what was your role there?
I was a machinist, a toolmaker.
Yeah.
So I was operating mills and lathes and that type of thing. So that was, I've been fortunate in having two new teams and two first wins, so very special.
But you haven't been in Argentina when it won. So do you remember when the team came back? Did they celebrate, or what happened then?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't. I didn't travel at that stage. So, but yeah, there was a local pub, and we had a pretty big celebration. And but it was a team in a lot of transition. There were a lot of the sort of original Williams people, and things were changing, and there was new management, and Frank had been pushed to one side. And in fact, not long into that year, I left and became a Formula 3 mechanic. And I did Formula 3 for the rest of that year. And then I joined Frank again when he got going with Patrick the year after.
Yeah. 1977 was a time when these kind of surprises were, it was still a surprise, but they were possible. 30 years later, I mean, it was more than a fairy tale that a completely new car, new team could win its first race. I think we have to start with the moment when Honda retired. Did you think at that moment the team can carry on?
Probably not. I mean, we had an anniversary dinner last week. Myself, Nick Fry, Nigel Kerr, Caroline McGrory, John Marsden, who was the HR director, Gordon Blair, who was the sort of finance or business advisor we got. So we had an anniversary dinner, and the anniversary was the anniversary of Honda telling us to close the factory. And I remember going to Slough to meet the Honda people, and I genuinely didn't know what was coming. I knew there was some trauma going on, so it was a massive shock to hear. And it was literally, you know, can you go back to the factory, tell everyone to go home, turn the lights off, shut the doors, and then we'll start the redundancy procedure. And Nick and I were in a small office with one of the Honda executives. And then we got taken out of the office into another office, which had all been pre-prepared. And it was a long office with all the specialists that they'd assembled to help us close the company. And in their mind, they were literally going to switch the company off at that stage. And naturally, you know, like motor racing people do, people generally, I think, do, you look at your options, you look at your alternatives. And we went back, and the first thing we recognized was we had to buy some time. And in the UK, there's very strict procedures for how you can close a company. You have to go through a certain consultation with the staff. You have to show that you've tried to save the company. And basically, it's a 3-month process. So, because this wasn't being closed for bankruptcy, this was being closed because Honda decided it didn't want to carry on anymore. So it wasn't in administration, it wasn't bankruptcy, it's simply. So we decided to take those 3 months to give ourselves some time and explain to Honda that we wouldn't accept to just shut the factory. And they had to go through the proper procedure. And then we started working out what we were going to do. But certainly for a certain period, we had no idea what was going to happen. And in fact, that went on for a few months because our first reaction was to try and sell the team. But we're in the middle of a chronic financial crisis. And the sort of people that came out of the woodwork who were trying to buy the team, most of them were crooks. And we simply wouldn't entertain. And that's where the idea started to grow of, well, let's take it on ourselves and let's see where this goes. And we managed to find a financial agreement with Honda, which was no more expensive for them to do what we proposed than closing the company. But it gave the company a lifeline.
And I think it came alive only 30 days before the season. And I remember Jensen was saying, well, probably couldn't test, and the others were already testing. He was quite optimistic because he knew the numbers, he saw the test times. But did you really trust your numbers when you saw the others were producing this and this lap times in Barcelona or Jerez, wherever they were driving?
Yeah, I mean, we had the simulations and the predictions of the performance of the car. And I think while this was a fairy story, you have to remember there was a fairly big organization, 700 people that were behind this car in the design and development. And what I decided to do when I joined Honda was I joined Honda at the end of 2007. 2008 was a holding year. 2009 was new regulations. So immediately in 2008, I got the majority of the team to focus on the new regulations. And we had a year of basically designing this car with 700 people. And we let the 2008 program run as well as it could, but focus very much on 2009. So this car was designed with a very strong group behind it. And we knew the performance numbers of this car. And you get a feel in Formula One because you go to technical meetings, you go to reviews, you get a feel for how people are doing. And I was coming back from meetings where teams were saying, we still can't find any performance, 50% down, etc. And I'm thinking, well, either that's a great bluff, or they really are. They haven't found the performance. And of course, when the testing started, we had the real evidence then that they hadn't found the performance. And like a lot of big technical changes, there were several concepts you could follow. And I think some of the big teams followed the wrong concept. I mean, McLaren, Ferrari, there were several teams that followed the wrong concept.
Yeah.
And some followed the right concept.
Yeah.
And so there was this almost digital, whether you were on the right side or the wrong side. And we were on the right side, and we saw the numbers. We were pretty excited, but we had to go out there and prove it. And the first test at Silverstone Club, small circuit, just verified our numbers. And so we were very excited at that stage.
The striking feature of that car was obviously the double diffuser. There was a lot of talk about it. I mean, who had the idea?
The double diffuser was born actually with our Japanese group because, as I say, Honda was a pretty powerful organization, and my task was to point it all in the right direction. And I felt even in that year I was there, we managed to start getting everything coordinated. And there was an aero program running in Japan. And one of the Japanese engineers came along with the concept and said, can we do this? And when we looked at the regulations, we thought, well, actually, why not? And it was quite late in the day. It was about August time, I think, when he proposed it. And we'd already done the sort of fundamentals of the car, the gearbox, the chassis, etc. So we had to work around what we already had. And it was a useful step in performance, but I think we had a very good car already.
Yeah.
There's a lot of emphasis on the double diffuser, and that was a good step. But actually, we had a very good car already. I wouldn't say we had a eureka moment where it went from here to here. We saw it was good, and then of course things evolved from there. But I've always found that when you get, and I've done it a couple of times in my career, where you focus the whole group on a new set of regulations. And I think in 2008, if I'm right, McLaren and Red Bull were fighting for the championship.
Yep.
So they had everything poured into that and really weren't able to put as much into their new car.
Okay. Yep.
And whereas I was only, I'd come back from a race, we'd get the job list done on a Monday, and then Tuesday was new car.
Okay.
And that's how, so for the rest of that week, and rather like I did at Ferrari, I made sure that all the key people weren't wasting their time going to a race, kept as many people back at the factory as I could. And I think when you do that, you just, you gain 6 months over where anyone else is.
Yeah.
And so the double diffuser was a key element, but it wasn't the only aspect, because there were 3 people with double diffusers that year.
Williams, Toyota.
And Toyota. And yet we won the races they didn't.
Yeah.
So
you won from the first 7 races, 6 out of them. Did you ever think at that time it could be tight at the end of the season, because then the others started to catch up?
Yeah, we'd sort of took a calculated risk on that, because we'd got enough money from Honda to run the first year. And we'd managed to free up our deal with Bernie, because Bernie hadn't paid Honda for a while because there was a dispute going on. And eventually we managed to clear that, which brought about another 30 million, I think, into the company. And that meant we actually had enough money for another year.
Okay.
By being fairly prudent in 2009, we had enough money to make it through probably 2010 as well. No big sponsor had appeared on the scene. We had a number of sponsors, but I wouldn't say any of them were substantial.
Yeah.
No big sponsor had appeared on the scene.
Despite all the wins.
Despite, it shows how bad the time was.
Yeah.
And so we were having to keep the costs down to give ourselves a chance of at least running in 2010. we knew we wouldn't be able to do the level of work that we really wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd also downsized the company. We'd gone from 700 to 400.
Mm-hmm.
And we were a relatively small Formula 1 team by then, even though we were winning races. So we really didn't have the capacity to develop the car, either financially or in terms of people. And that showed. So as the year went on, I mean, the great thing was we had some success. In the latter part of the year, we won Monza.
Valencia, I think.
Valencia. And that meant we hung on.
Yeah.
But given the dominance we had at the beginning of the year, if we'd had the resource and funding and kept that going, then of course it would have been a lot easier. But we were taking this judgment call on we could have poured the money in, but had to stop at the end of 2009.
Yeah.
Or could we keep it going? And luckily we managed to still win the championships.
Yeah. And when did this Mercedes opportunity come along then?
Sometime, I honestly can't remember. I mean, we knew there was the relationship with McLaren was getting a little bit difficult. Norbert always had an ambition to have his own Mercedes team. And we were doing well, we were winning races. It just evolved during the year. And in fact, we had someone else trying to buy the team as well because of the success. And we could have probably taken, quite frankly, a more lucrative deal than the deal we did with Mercedes. But I felt, and the other directors felt, Mercedes was a better long-term prospect for the people and for the team, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah. And then you obviously engaged Michael Schumacher, which was was coming out of the blue, more or less. So how did it start?
Well, we won the championship with Jensen, and there'd been a little bit of friction with Jensen, and that he could see that we were selling the company to Mercedes. There was no doubt that the shareholders were going to make some money out of the deal, and Jensen felt he should have been part of that. And I think he got a little bit frustrated with that situation. And then when the McLaren offer came along, because he went to McLaren, from my understanding, for the same retainer as we were paying him. There was a lot of fuss about how he'd taken a big dive in his salary, etc. But Honda had compensated him for the contract he had. So in fact, probably in that year, 2009, Jensen earned more than he'd ever earned because Honda compensated him for his breach of contract. And then we retained him as well. So it was a pretty good year for him. World Championship, probably more than he'd been paid ever. So that came out of the blue, and it was very disappointing, I have to say. I'd seen Michael had tried to get in the Ferrari when Felipe was injured, which showed he had some motivation and some. And so I called him up and said, "Do you fancy a beer?" And he knew what I was going to talk about. So it happened quite quickly. And the commercial side was fairly straightforward. We managed to get it through the Mercedes board fairly quickly. And the deal was done.
3 years later, you left the team. Why did you do that?
Me?
Yeah.
It was a new dynamic for me to have owned a team and sold a team, and I felt frustrated in a way that I'd not be able to take the team forward. The team was doing okay. I mean, the year I left, we finished second in the World Championship. We had a sort of upward trajectory. But Mercedes board had lost faith in me and Norbert during that period, and brought in, first of all, Nicky, and then they brought in Toto. And it was almost, there was too many chefs in the kitchen.
Okay.
And I recognized that it was my failing that had created that situation. Because what I should have done was just made an enormous fuss about the budgets we needed and the commitment we needed to be successful. And it was in the period when this resource restriction was being applied, or trying to be applied. And Mercedes were reluctant to make the commitment to step up the team, because they thought the resource restriction was coming and the team would be perfectly sized. And we were still 400, 450 people. And we still had teams of 600, 700 people out there that were supposedly going to come down to our level, but it never happened. And where Toto was successful is he persuaded the board that we had to step up. And that's what they've done. They've got 900 plus people now. And he's been very good at doing that. And that's where reflecting on it, that was my failure, because I should have just made a lot more noise about what was needed. I mean, Toto came into the company, I remember at one of the first board meetings, he said to the board, this team has less money than Williams, where I've just come from. So how can you expect to win a world championship when you have even less money than Williams? But somehow they got the impression they could win for a lot less because we did this. This wasn't a real situation.
True.
This was a false situation. And hand on heart, we never sold the company on that basis. We sold the company on what the prospects were, but we needed to make that commitment. And then eventually, I remember Dieter Zetsche, we had the board meeting where he said, right, we either pull out or we go for it. And we said we're going to go for it. And I don't think I've ever regretted that decision. But by then, my relationships were tense. And the board started to put the money in. We got Aldo Costa, we got Jeff Willis, we got the money to upgrade the wind tunnel system to 60%. We started to do all the things we knew we had to do. And the first results came through in 2013, second place. And we'd started the 14 car with that group. And with the same principle as this, that we were going to put a lot of resource in and get ahead with the new regulations. That's what happened. But it was a personal thing. I like to run my own show. We had 3 people involved, 4 people with Norbert. And that was something I was never... And the final straw was when they took on Paddy without telling me. That was, for me, was a breach of faith or a breach of,
Understand.
And when that happened, I asked Nicky what happened. He said it was Toto, and I asked Toto, and he said it was Nicky.
Okay.
That tells you everything.
Coming to the end of this part is then there was a break, and now you have another different job. You have been mechanic, aerodynamicist, engineer, technical director, team principal. Now you run the show. You're one of the 3 who runs the show. How much different is that work, this final part of your career?
Quite different in that obviously, there's not quite the definition of what you do. I mean, with when you're in a team, you've got very hard timings, you've got very fixed schedules. The race starts on a Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock or 10 past 2 now. So, that's fixed, and you have to have the car. And this is a more fluid world in some ways, although there are schedules and there are objectives, and we can't let things slip. But it's it's a different world in that respect. It doesn't quite have the highs that being frontline with a team has, but it doesn't have the lows that being struggling with a team has. You take that, and I don't want that anymore. I know the commitment that's needed. I know the stress and the impact it has on your personal life to be in a team and be at the front line. And I've done my time on that. I've enjoyed it immensely, and I don't want to spoil that. So this is a new set of objectives, and I just was always on that side thinking there could be so much more that could be done to make things better. So now I've got the opportunity, and no excuses really, but it's a difficult world, and the teams are very competitive. They all have different views. Trying to get them to come together and see the bigger picture. What Chase is very good at is giving them a reference for worlds he's been in, where people do see the bigger picture.
Okay.
He was very involved with the NFL in America, where the Dallas Cowboys and New York Yankees and whoever they were. Is the Yankees a football team? I can't remember. But anyway, all the big football teams they came together and realized that they had to help save themselves.
Yeah.
Because they were all outspending each other, and they were getting elite teams and teams that were not doing well. And so they evolved a system so that they made the whole thing much healthier. That's a good word.
Yeah.
And now their teams are worth billions. You know, if you want to buy an NFL team, God knows how many billions you have to pay to buy it.
Yeah.
And they all make a profit, and still the elite still win, but not every year.
Yeah.
And so he's come from that world where there is healthy competition, and there's still the grandees, but it's contained in a sustainable environment.
Yeah.
And he just looks at our world and thinks, why are you not taking this opportunity? And people just have to let go a little bit of their own positions and still have the confidence that even in this new world they're going to be able to win if they do a better job than anyone else. Not win because they bulldoze it with more money and more resource than anyone else. They win because they're smarter, they're cleverer, they've got better technology, they've got better people. That's how they should win.
Okay.
And so he's a great reference for that, and he's a great advocate for guys. I've seen this work. You know, you might say that's the way it's always been in Formula One, but unless we change, we're still going to continue with the difficulties we have today. It's not a team in Formula One that makes a profit.
Yeah.
And that's lunacy with the money that's coming into Formula One.
Ja.
So.
Okay. Ja, liebe Zuschauer, ich glaube, das ist ein gutes Schlusswort von Ross Brawn. Wir bedanken uns bei ihm hier, dass wir hier sein durften, dass wir vorher bei ihm zu Hause sein durften. Und ja, wir wünschen ihm, dass Liberty alle ihre Pläne durchsetzt bis 2021. Die Formel 1, glaube ich, braucht eine Änderung. Und dann bis zum nächsten Mal. Vielen Dank. Ciao.